The day I found out my mother sold me for money, I wished I had never been born. The woman who carried me for 9 months, the woman I called Mama, looked into my eyes and chose money over me. And what hurt the most wasn't the sale itself. It was discovering she had planned it for years. Some people spend their lives trying to understand why strangers hurt them. I spent mine trying to understand why my own mother did. Even now, after everything that happened, there are nights when I wake up staring into the darkness, hearing her voice in my head, wondering if there was ever a moment when she truly loved me the way a mother should love her child. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. What I know for certain is that there was a price attached to my future, long before I ever knew it existed. A price that would change the course of my life forever. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. When people hear the words, "My mother sold me for money," they often imagine something that happened suddenly. A desperate decision made in a moment of hardship. A choice forced by poverty. A mistake followed by regret. I used to believe that too. I wanted to believe it because the truth was much harder to accept. The truth was that what happened to me was not a single decision. It was a plan. A plan that stretched across years of my life while I remained completely unaware. I grew up in a small town in the American Midwest. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where children rode bicycles down quiet streets, and where families gathered for church every Sunday. From the outside, my family looked ordinary. We weren't rich, we weren't poor. We lived in a modest house with peeling paint and a front yard my mother constantly complained about but never had time to fix. My father died when I was 8 years old, a heart attack. At least that's what everyone said. One day he was there, laughing at the dinner table, and the next he was gone. After his death, everything changed. My mother Susan became harder. The warmth she once showed seemed to disappear. Bills piled up. Stress followed her everywhere. I remember watching her sit at the kitchen table late at night surrounded by paperwork. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she stared silently at the wall for hours. As a child, I felt sorry for her. As an adult, I would realize those nights meant something entirely different. For years, I tried to be the daughter she wanted. I stayed out of trouble. I earned good grades. I helped around the house. If she asked me to clean, I cleaned. If she asked me to babysit neighborhood kids, I did it. If she needed help paying bills after I turned 16, I worked weekends at a grocery store and handed over most of my paycheck without complaint. No matter what I did, it never seemed enough. My older brother Ryan noticed it too. He was 4 years older than me and always protective. Whenever Mom criticized me, Ryan stepped in. Whenever she blamed me for something I didn't do, Ryan defended me. Looking back now, I think he saw things long before I did. He recognized signs I was too young to understand. One night when I was 15, Ryan said something that stayed with me for years. He looked at me and asked, "Do you ever feel like Mom treats you differently?" At the time, I laughed. "What do you mean?" He hesitated before answering. "I don't know. Just differently." I brushed it off. Every family has problems. Every parent has favorites. At least that's what I told myself. I wish I had listened more carefully. Because years later, I would discover that Ryan wasn't asking a question. He was warning me. And the reason behind that warning began with a secret agreement my mother made when I was still a child. An agreement involving a wealthy man, a large amount of money, and me. The strange part is that the clues were always there. I simply didn't know how to see them. The first clue appeared when I turned 17. A black luxury car began showing up near our house. At first, I thought it belonged to a neighbor. Then I noticed a pattern. The car only appeared when my mother was home. It usually arrived during the afternoon when I was at school and left before dinner. One day I came home early because classes had been canceled. As I walked toward the front door, I saw the car parked in our driveway. A man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s. Expensive suit, perfectly polished shoes. The kind of confidence that comes from having more money than most people will ever see in their lifetime. The moment he noticed me, he smiled. Not the smile of a stranger. The smile of someone who already knew exactly who I was. And for a brief second, something about the way he looked at me made my stomach tighten. I couldn't explain it. I didn't understand it. But years later, I would remember that moment with absolute clarity. Because that was the first time I came face to face with the man who believed he had already paid for my future. And the terrifying part was this. My mother had never told me his name. The man stood beside the black car for only a few seconds before my mother hurried outside. The expression on her face caught my attention immediately. It wasn't fear. It wasn't happiness either. It was something I couldn't quite identify at the time. The closest word I can find now is caution. She looked like someone trying very hard to make sure nothing went wrong. The moment she saw me standing near the front porch, she froze. For a second, nobody spoke. Then she forced a smile. "You're home early," I nodded. School was canceled. The man continued watching me. Not staring. Watching. There is a difference. A stare feels obvious. Watching feels calculated. The feeling made me uncomfortable. My mother quickly introduced him. "This is Mr. Walker." The man extended his hand. His grip was firm. "Nice to finally meet you." Those words stayed with me. Nice to finally meet you. Not nice to meet you. Nice to finally meet you. At the time, I ignored the difference. Now I know better. Because people don't say finally unless they've been waiting. I remember looking at my mother. She immediately changed the subject. "Go inside and start your homework." The tone in her voice wasn't a request. It was an order. I walked into the house, but curiosity got the better of me. A few minutes later, I peeked through the kitchen window. The two of them were talking beside the car. Then something happened. Mr. Walker handed my mother an envelope. A thick envelope. She took it quickly and slipped it into her purse. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it was enough. The image stayed with me long after the car disappeared down the street. That night, I asked her about him. She barely looked up from her dinner. "He's a business associate." "What kind of business?" "Adult business." "What does that mean?" "It means it's none of your concern." The conversation ended there, or at least it appeared to. Because from that day forward, I started noticing things. The first thing I noticed was that our financial situation suddenly improved, not dramatically, just enough to raise questions. The overdue bills disappeared. The refrigerator was fuller. The constant stress on my mother's face seemed lighter. Repairs around the house finally got done. Whenever I asked where the extra money came from, she always gave the same answer. Don't worry about it. As months passed, Mr. Walker continued visiting. Sometimes every week, sometimes twice a month. Always during hours when he thought I wasn't home. Yet somehow, he always seemed interested in me. He'd ask questions. How were my grades? What colleges was I considering? Did I have a boyfriend? What were my plans after graduation? At first, I assumed he was simply being polite, but eventually his interest started feeling unusual, almost personal. One afternoon, I came home unexpectedly and found him sitting in our living room. My mother was making coffee. Mr. Walker smiled when he saw me. Then he said something that made the room feel colder. You're growing up exactly as expected. My mother immediately interrupted. She has homework. The conversation ended right there. But the sentence never left my mind. Exactly as expected. Expected by who? And why? The older I became, the stranger things felt. When I graduated high school, I received acceptance letters from 3 universities. I was excited. For the first time, I could see a future beyond our town. A future where I made my own choices. A future where I built my own life. I ran into the kitchen carrying the letters. My mother barely reacted. Most parents would have celebrated. She looked annoyed. I remember her exact words. College isn't always the best option. I laughed. What are you talking about? This is amazing. She didn't smile. We'll discuss it later. That discussion never happened. Instead, every time I mentioned college, she found a reason to avoid the topic. Tuition costs, distance, housing, student loans. The excuses changed constantly. The resistance remained the same. At the time, I thought she simply didn't want me moving away. Many parents struggle with that. What I didn't realize was that my future plans threatened something she had spent years protecting. A secret arrangement, a promise, a transaction. And the closer I got to independence, the more nervous she became. Then came the summer I turned 19. The summer everything began falling apart. By then, I had started dating a young man named Ethan. He was kind, hardworking, funny, the type of person who made difficult days easier. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. My mother hated him immediately. No explanation, no reason, just instant hostility. Whenever he visited, she found excuses to criticize him. Whenever I talked about him, she changed the subject. Whenever I mentioned our future together, she became angry. One evening, after Ethan left, she finally exploded. You need to stop seeing him. I stared at her. What? You heard me. Why? Because I said so. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was 19 years old, an adult. Yet she spoke as if I were still a child. I refused. And for the first time in my life, I openly challenged her authority. The argument lasted nearly 2 hours. At one point, she became so upset that she accidentally revealed something she never intended to say. She pointed her finger directly at me and shouted, You belong somewhere else. The room went silent. Even she seemed shocked by her own words. I stared at her. What does that mean? She looked away. Nothing. Just anger. Just frustration. Just a mistake. At least that's what she claimed. But I knew better. Because deep down, something had shifted. The pieces still didn't fit together. The picture remained incomplete. But for the first time, I could sense its shape. And whatever truth my mother was hiding, it was far bigger than money. Far bigger than Mr. Walker. Far bigger than anything I had imagined. What I didn't know was that the answer was already sitting inside a locked metal box hidden in her bedroom closet. A box filled with documents, receipts, bank records, and one signed agreement that would reveal exactly how long my mother had been collecting payments connected to my life. An agreement that started when I was only 9 years old. And once that box was opened, nothing would ever be the same again. Part 2. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what my mother had said. You belong somewhere else. Most people would probably have dismissed it as something spoken in anger. People say things they don't mean when emotions take over. That explanation should have satisfied me. It should have allowed me to move on with my life. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The sentence settled into my mind and refused to leave. Every time I looked at my mother, I heard those words again. Every time she received a phone call and walked into another room, I thought about those words. Every time I saw her watching me with that strange expression she sometimes had when she thought I wasn't looking, I thought about those words. It felt as if I had spent my entire life standing in front of a locked door without realizing it existed. Now I knew the door was there, and I couldn't rest until I found out what was behind it. A week later, an opportunity presented itself. My mother left town for the day to attend what she described as a business meeting. That alone was unusual. She rarely traveled. When she did, she usually returned home before sunset. This trip was different. She would be gone until late evening. The moment she drove away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Guilt. A heavy, uncomfortable feeling. Because I already knew what I was planning to do. For years, I had respected my mother's privacy. I never searched through her belongings. I never read her mail. I never questioned her decisions. But trust changes when secrets start appearing. And by that point, I was beginning to suspect that my entire life had been built on information that had been deliberately hidden from me. Around noon, I walked into her bedroom. My heart was racing. The room looked exactly as it always had. The same dresser, the same family photographs, the same floral curtains hanging beside the window. Everything appeared normal. Yet standing there felt different, almost like entering a place I wasn't supposed to see. I started with the obvious places. Drawers, cabinets, shelves, nothing. Most of what I found was ordinary. Old photographs, tax documents, receipts, medical records. For nearly an hour, I found absolutely nothing that explained the growing questions in my mind. Then I opened her closet. At first, it looked completely ordinary. Rows of clothes, shoes, storage containers, extra blankets. Then I noticed something pushed against the back wall. A small metal box. My pulse quickened. The box was locked. I stared at it for several seconds. A locked box hidden at the back of a closet. If there were answers anywhere, they were probably inside. The problem was getting it open. I nearly gave up. Then I remembered something. Years earlier, my mother had shown me where she kept spare keys for emergencies. Most people forget things like that. I didn't. 10 minutes later, I found the key taped underneath a shelf in the laundry room. When I returned to the bedroom, my hands were shaking. The lock clicked open. The sound seemed louder than it should have. For a moment, I simply stared. Then I lifted the lid. What I saw changed everything. Inside were folders, dozens of them, neatly organized, labeled by year. Some went back more than a decade. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The top folder contained bank statements, large deposits, consistent deposits, thousands of dollars arriving at regular intervals, month after month, year after year. The sender's name appeared repeatedly. Walker Holdings. My stomach tightened. Mr. Walker. I flipped through more pages. The deposits continued. Some were small, others were enormous. Certain years contained payments larger than my mother earned from her job. Yet somehow she had never mentioned any of it. I kept reading. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. There were letters, contracts, correspondence, documents containing signatures. One folder in particular stood apart from the others. Unlike everything else, it had a red sticker attached to the front. Important. Confidential. I opened it carefully. Inside was a document unlike anything I had seen before. The paper appeared old. The signature dates were faded. But they remained readable. I immediately recognized my mother's signature. I recognized Mr. Walker's signature too. Then I reached the section that mentioned me. My entire body went cold. My name appeared multiple times. Not casually. Not as a reference. As the subject of the agreement. I read the page once. Then twice. Then a third time. Each time hoping I had misunderstood. I hadn't. The document described a long-term financial arrangement involving future guardianship discussions, educational oversight, and financial commitments connected directly to me. The language was formal, complicated, carefully written. Yet one thing was crystal clear. Mr. Walker had been financially involved in my life for many years. Far longer than I had ever known. Far longer than made any sense. Questions flooded my mind. Why? What did he want? Why was my mother accepting money? What exactly had she promised him? And perhaps most frightening of all, how much of my future had already been decided without my knowledge? I continued searching through the box. Then I found something even more disturbing. Photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of me. School events. Birthdays. Graduations. Family gatherings. Some photos had clearly been taken by relatives. Others had not. A few appeared to have been taken from a distance. As if someone had been monitoring milestones in my life. I felt sick. There was no logical explanation. No innocent explanation. Only questions. More questions than answers. I was still staring at the photographs when I heard something outside. A car door. My heart nearly stopped. I rushed to the window. My mother's car. She was home. Hours earlier than expected. Panic surged through me. I quickly shoved the documents back into the box. Closed the lid. Locked it. Returned everything exactly where I had found it. By the time she entered the house, I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch television. But something had changed. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of discovering the truth. I was afraid of how much truth there actually was. And as I watched my mother walk through the front door carrying her purse, smiling as though nothing was wrong, I realized something terrifying. The documents had answered one question. Mr. Walker had been paying her for years. But they had created an even bigger one. What exactly was he expecting in return? The answer would arrive 3 nights later, in the form of a phone call. A phone call my mother never intended me to hear. And after that conversation, there would be no doubt left about what was happening. Because for the first time, someone would say the quiet part out loud. For 3 days, I carried the secret alone. 3 days of pretending everything was normal. 3 days of sitting across from my mother at the dinner table, while acting as though I hadn't discovered a locked box filled with documents connected to my life. 3 days of forcing smiles. 3 days of unanswered questions. The strange thing about secrets is that once you know they exist, you begin seeing them everywhere. Every conversation sounds different. Every glance feels suspicious. Every silence feels intentional. I started paying closer attention to everything my mother did. The phone calls she took in private. The messages she deleted immediately after reading. The moments she disappeared into another room whenever certain names appeared on her screen. One name appeared more than any other. Walker. Every time I saw it, my stomach tightened. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to place the documents on the table and demand answers. But something stopped me. Instinct. The feeling that I still didn't know enough. The feeling that if I confronted her too early, she would find a way to explain everything away. So I waited. And sometimes waiting gives the truth enough time to expose itself. 3 nights later, that is exactly what happened. It was nearly midnight. The house was quiet. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to the documents hidden inside that metal box. I got out of bed and walked toward the kitchen for a glass of water. As I reached the hallway, I noticed a light coming from beneath my mother's bedroom door. She was still awake. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the sound. Her voice. Low, urgent, almost nervous. She was on the phone. Normally, I would have continued walking. That night, I stopped. The words drifting through the door made my entire body freeze. I know what we agreed. Silence. Then her voice again. No, she doesn't know yet. My heart started pounding. I moved closer. Carefully. Quietly. The next sentence changed everything. She's becoming difficult. The voice on the other end said something I couldn't hear. My mother sighed. I understand. But she's asking questions now. Another pause. Then came the sentence that still haunts me. No. She won't back out. The glass I was holding nearly slipped from my hand. Back out of what? What exactly was I supposed to be doing? I pressed closer. Every nerve in my body felt alive. For years, I had trusted this woman completely. Now I felt like a stranger standing outside my own life. My mother's voice dropped even lower. You've waited long enough. A pause. I know. Another pause. The arrangements will happen soon. I stopped breathing. Arrangements. The same word that appeared inside several of the documents. The same word connected to the payments. The same word connected to Mr. Walker. Then came the final sentence. The sentence that shattered every remaining doubt. I gave you my word years ago. Years ago. Not months. Not recently. Years. The call ended shortly afterward. I rushed back to my room before she could open the door. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. For nearly an hour, I sat on my bed staring into the darkness. One thought kept repeating itself. My mother had promised someone something involving me, and whatever that promise was, it had existed for years. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. I barely touched breakfast. My mother noticed immediately. You feeling okay? I looked at her. For a moment, I almost laughed. The concern in her voice sounded genuine. That was what made everything so confusing. How could someone sound so caring while hiding something this enormous? I'm fine, I replied. She studied me for a second, then nodded. But I noticed something. She looked nervous too. As though she sensed something had changed. As though she could feel the distance growing between us. The distance she had created herself. Later that afternoon, I called Ryan. My brother answered immediately. Hey kid. His voice brought a strange sense of comfort. For years, Ryan had been the one person I trusted completely. The one person who never lied to me. The one person who always protected me. And for the first time, I decided to tell him everything. The documents, the payments, the phone call, the hidden agreement. When I finished speaking, there was silence. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of recognition. My heart sank. Ryan? Another pause. Then he said something I wasn't prepared to hear. I was hoping I was wrong. Every muscle in my body tightened. What do you mean? Ryan exhaled slowly. The sound carried years of frustration. Years of guilt. Years of secrets. Then he spoke. There are things I never told you. The room suddenly felt smaller. What things? Another pause. Longer this time. When he finally answered, his voice sounded heavier than I had ever heard before. Do you remember Dad's funeral? The question caught me off guard. Of course. I saw Walker there. I frowned. That's impossible. No. Ryan's voice remained steady. It isn't. I sat frozen. Walker. At my father's funeral. Years before he supposedly entered our lives. Years before my mother claimed to know him. Years before any of this was supposed to have started. My heart began racing again. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was 12. His answer came immediately. I didn't understand what it meant. The memory had clearly stayed with him all these years. I remember Mom talking to him afterward. Ryan continued. They looked worried. I felt sick. Very sick. Because suddenly the timeline no longer made sense. The payments hadn't started after we met Mr. Walker. The connection had existed long before that. Possibly long before my father's death. And if that was true, then the secret was bigger than I imagined. Much bigger. Ryan's next words confirmed it. There is something else. I gripped the phone tighter. What? When Dad died, he hesitated, then continued. Mom wasn't surprised. A chill moved through my body. What are you saying? I'm saying she cried. His voice lowered, but it felt like she already knew it was coming. The words hung between us. Heavy, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. For several seconds neither of us spoke, because both of us were thinking the same thing, the same terrifying possibility. The possibility that everything we believed about our family was incomplete. The possibility that the story began much earlier than either of us realized. And the possibility that our father's death was connected to secrets we still didn't understand. But neither of us knew that the biggest revelation was still ahead. Because 24 hours later, Ryan would find something hidden inside our father's old belongings. Something that had been overlooked for years. A letter. A single handwritten letter. And inside that letter was a warning. A warning our father had written shortly before he died. A warning about my mother. And about a man named Walker. The next day felt longer than any day I could remember. After my conversation with Ryan, sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, pieces of the story replayed in my mind. The payments, the documents, the phone call, Mr. Walker standing outside our house. my mother's nervous expressions, and now, the possibility that whatever was happening had started before my father's death. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. There had to be, because the alternative was too difficult to accept. No daughter wants to believe that her entire childhood was built around a secret. No daughter wants to wonder whether the people she trusted most were hiding the truth from her. By late afternoon, Ryan called. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. His voice sounded different. Not scared, not angry. Disturbed. The kind of disturbance that comes from discovering information you wish you had never found. Where are you? He asked. At home. Can you meet me? My heart immediately began racing. What happened? A pause. Then Ryan answered. I found something. 40 minutes later, I was sitting across from him inside a small diner on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty. A waitress filled our coffee cups and walked away. Ryan didn't touch his drink. Instead, he slid an old envelope across the table. The paper looked worn, yellow with age. The edges were slightly damaged. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. What is it? Ryan leaned back. I found it in Dad's storage box. My pulse quickened. What kind of letter is it? His answer came quietly. A warning. The words settled over the table like a storm cloud. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. Dad's. I hadn't seen it in years. For a moment, emotion hit me unexpectedly. Memories flooded back. His laugh, his voice, the way he used to carry me on his shoulders, the way he promised everything would always be okay. My eyes filled with tears. Then I started reading. The letter wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even addressed to Ryan. It was addressed to nobody. Almost like a journal entry. A record. Something written by a man trying to make sense of things around him. The first few lines seemed harmless. Work problems, financial concerns, stress. Then I reached a sentence that changed everything. Susan has become close to Richard Walker, and I don't trust his intentions. I froze. Richard Walker. For the first time I saw Mr. Walker's full name. I continued reading. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Dad described strange meetings. Private conversations. Unexplained gifts. Money appearing without explanation. Business opportunities that never seemed entirely clear. The concerns grew stronger with every page. Then I reached the final section. The section Ryan had highlighted. I fear Susan is making decisions that could affect our family in ways she doesn't fully understand. If anything happens to me, someone should take a closer look at Walker and the promises being made. I stared at the sentence. Again. And again. And again. The air seemed to disappear from the room. If anything happens to me. The words echoed inside my head. Ryan watched my reaction carefully. What do you think? I couldn't answer immediately. Because the question wasn't simple anymore. Months earlier, I would have dismissed the letter as paranoia. Now it felt different. Now it felt like another piece of a puzzle. Another warning. Another sign that secrets had existed long before I ever noticed them. What happened after he wrote this? I asked. Ryan shook his head. I don't know. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then Ryan said something unexpected. I remember a fight. I looked up. A fight? He nodded slowly. About a month before Dad died. I listened carefully. The memory clearly remained vivid. I woke up in the middle of the night. Ryan stared down at his coffee. I heard shouting. My stomach tightened. What were they arguing about? I couldn't hear everything. His voice became quieter. But I remember one sentence. The way he said it made my chest tighten. What sentence? Ryan looked directly at me. Dad kept saying she couldn't do it. The words landed heavily. What couldn't she do? I don't know. Another pause. But Mom kept saying she already made a commitment. Commitment? The same language. The same kind of wording. Commitments. Arrangements. Promises. The same phrases appeared everywhere. In the documents. In the phone call. Now in memories connected to our father. It was becoming impossible to ignore. The pattern was clear. The question was not, what exactly had she committed to? As we sat there, another memory surfaced. With one I hadn't thought about in years. Suddenly I remembered something from childhood. A birthday party. I must have been around 10 years old. There had been guests, neighbors, friends, family members, and one man standing near the edge of the yard. Watching. Not participating. Watching. Richard Walker. At the time, I thought he was simply another adult. Now I realized something frightening. He had been present during milestones throughout my life. Far earlier than I understood. Far earlier than made sense. Almost as though he had been following my growth. Tracking my progress. Waiting. The realization made me feel sick. Ryan noticed immediately. What is it? I told him. His face changed. Because he remembered too. The birthday. The graduation ceremony. Several school events. Walker had appeared at all of them. Never as family. Never as a close friend. Yet somehow always present. The pattern became impossible to deny. For years he had remained close enough to observe. Close enough to monitor. Close enough to know exactly what was happening in my life. The question neither of us wanted to ask finally emerged. Why? Why would a wealthy businessman spend years keeping track of a girl who wasn't his daughter? Neither of us had an answer. But before we left the diner, Ryan made a decision. A decision that would change everything. We need proof. I nodded. He was right. Suspicions weren't enough. Memories weren't enough. Even the letter wasn't enough. We needed evidence. Real evidence. Something that explained exactly what agreement existed between our mother and Richard Walker. Something that revealed what had been promised. And perhaps most importantly, something that revealed what Walker expected to receive in return. Neither of us knew it yet, but the evidence already existed. Not in our mother's house, not in Walker's office, but inside a safety deposit box at a local bank. A box opened years earlier under both of their names. A box containing contracts, photographs, financial records, and one document so shocking that even the bank employee who eventually saw it would struggle to believe it was real. And once that box was opened, the truth would no longer be a mystery. It would become undeniable. By the time I left the diner that evening, one thing had become painfully clear. The questions were multiplying faster than the answers. Every discovery seemed to open 3 more doors. The documents in my mother's closet had raised questions. The phone call had raised more. My father's letter had added an entirely new layer to the mystery. Yet despite everything we had uncovered, we were still missing the most important piece. Proof. Real proof. Not suspicions, not memories, not assumptions. Something concrete. Something that explained exactly why Richard Walker had spent years connected to my family, and why my mother had allowed it. For the next several days, Ryan and I spoke constantly. Every free moment became part of our investigation. We compared memories, reviewed old photographs, looked through family records, examined every detail we could find. The strange thing about searching for the truth is that once you begin, you start noticing details that never seemed important before. A photograph suddenly means something. A conversation suddenly matters. A forgotten memory suddenly becomes relevant. That was exactly what happened. 3 days later, Ryan called me early in the morning. His voice sounded excited. I found something. I sat upright immediately. What is it? Remember Aunt Carol? Of course I remembered her. She was my father's older sister. We weren't particularly close, but she had always been kind. After Dad's death, she gradually drifted away from the family. At the time, I assumed it was because life became busy. Now, I wasn't so sure. What about her? Ryan hesitated. Then he said something unexpected. She stopped talking to Mom for a reason. The statement caught my attention immediately. What reason? I don't know yet. His voice remained serious. But I think she does. A few hours later, we were driving toward Aunt Carol's house. The entire trip felt tense. Neither of us spoke much. Both of us were thinking the same thing. What if she knew something? What if she had known all along? When we finally arrived, she seemed surprised to see us. Especially together. After a few minutes of small talk, Ryan decided to stop wasting time. Aunt Carol, we need to ask you something. Her smile faded. Immediately. The reaction told me everything. She already knew this conversation was coming. Or at least she had feared it might one day happen. Ryan placed Dad's letter on the table. The moment she saw the handwriting, her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough to tell us we were on the right path. Aunt Carol, I said quietly. What aren't we being told? The room became silent. For several moments she simply stared at the letter. Then she looked at me. The sadness in her eyes surprised me. It was the look of someone carrying information they wished they didn't have. Finally she spoke. Your father was worried. I swallowed. Worried about what? She sighed deeply. Walker. There it was again. The name. Always the same name. Always at the center of everything. Aunt Carol folded her hands. He started appearing around your family years before your father died. My heart pounded. How? He invested in several local businesses. That part wasn't surprising. Walker was wealthy. People like him invested everywhere. What came next was surprising. But your father never trusted him. I leaned forward. Why? Aunt Carol hesitated. Then she answered. Because Walker wasn't interested in business. The room suddenly felt smaller. What do you mean? She looked directly at me. He was interested in your family. A chill moved through my body. For years I had felt that something wasn't right. Now someone else was finally saying it out loud. He attended events he wasn't invited to. She continued. He asked questions that weren't his business. Ryan and I exchanged a glance. Everything she described matched our memories perfectly. The birthday parties, the school functions, the constant interest in my life. It all fit. Then Aunt Carol revealed something neither of us expected. Your father confronted him. The words hit like a hammer. What? She nodded. Twice. My pulse quickened. When? A few months before he died. The room fell silent. I could barely breathe. What happened? Aunt Carol looked down briefly, then back up. Walker denied everything. A pause. But your father wasn't convinced. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Ryan asked the question hanging over all of us. What was Walker interested in? Aunt Carol's answer came slowly, carefully, as though she had spent years deciding whether to reveal it. He believed Walker wanted influence over your future. The sentence landed heavily. Influence over my future. Not ownership. Not control. Influence. The exact kind of language that appeared in the documents. Educational oversight. Guardianship discussions. Financial commitments. Suddenly everything felt connected. The contracts. The payments. The promises. The years of involvement. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. But we still didn't know why. Why me? Why would a wealthy businessman become obsessed with influencing the future of a child who wasn't related to him? The answer finally arrived through a memory. Aunt Carol stood and walked toward a cabinet. After searching for a moment, she returned holding an old photograph. She placed it on the table. Ryan and I looked down. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The picture showed a charity event from years earlier. Several local families, community leaders, business owners. Then I noticed something. Richard Walker stood near the center, and beside him was my mother. Not standing casually, not standing as acquaintances, standing together, close, much closer than I had ever seen before. The date printed on the photograph made my stomach drop. The picture had been taken 2 years before my father's death. 2 years. Meaning their relationship had existed far longer than we knew. Far longer than my mother ever admitted. Far longer than made sense. Then I noticed something else. Walker wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking directly at me. A little girl standing in the corner of the photograph. No older than 7. The sight sent a cold wave through my body. Even Aunt Carol noticed my reaction. That's when your father started asking questions. I couldn't stop staring at the image. Walker. Watching me. Years before I even knew his name. Years before the payments. Years before the agreements. Years before everything. And suddenly a terrifying possibility entered my mind. What if this wasn't something that started after my father's death? What if it started before? What if the plans involving me had already been taking shape while he was still alive? The thought was horrifying, but the next discovery would be worse. Because later that night, Ryan would receive an anonymous email. No sender name. No explanation. Just a single attachment, a scanned document. 1 page. 1 signature. 1 date. And 1 sentence that would finally reveal what my mother had been promised in exchange for me. The sentence began with 5 words neither of us would ever forget. In consideration of future arrangements. That night, neither Ryan nor I expected anything significant to happen. We had spent the entire afternoon at Aunt Carol's house reviewing old memories, examining photographs, and trying to connect pieces of a story that still refused to make complete sense. By the time I arrived home, I felt emotionally exhausted. For years, I had believed my life was ordinary. Now every memory seemed questionable. Every family story seemed incomplete. Every explanation seemed unreliable. I was sitting on my bed scrolling through old photographs when my phone rang. Ryan. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. His breathing sounded uneven. Not panic. Shock. The kind of shock that follows a discovery you never expected to make. Check your email. My stomach tightened immediately. What happened? Just check it. His voice was barely above a whisper. I opened my laptop. My inbox loaded slowly. Then I saw it. 1 new message. No name, no identifying information, no subject line. Just an attachment. A scanned document. Nothing else. I hesitated. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Every instinct told me this mattered. The question was how much. Finally, I clicked. The document opened. At first, it appeared ordinary. Legal language. Formal wording. Paragraph after paragraph of terminology that seemed designed to confuse anyone reading it. Then my eyes landed on a familiar name. Richard Walker. My pulse quickened. A second later, I saw another name. My mother's. I immediately sat forward. The document wasn't recent. The date appeared near the top. I checked it twice. Then a third time. The date was nearly 14 years old. 14 years. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misread it. I checked again. The result remained the same. 14 years. That meant the agreement had existed when I was still a child. Long before I understood what was happening around me. Long before the mysterious visits. Long before the payments I found in the metal box. Long before almost everything. I continued reading. The further I went, the more uneasy I became. Then I reached the section Ryan had been talking about. The sentence that began with 5 words. In consideration of future arrangements. I felt my chest tighten. The language that followed was carefully written. Carefully enough to avoid sounding alarming. Yet the meaning remained impossible to miss. The document outlined financial compensation. Long-term support. Educational funding. Additional benefits tied to specific future outcomes. Outcomes connected directly to me. Not by name at first. But, eventually the references became obvious. The wording described a minor child. A future guardian relationship. Access to decision-making influence. Long-term involvement. Everything seemed designed to avoid saying exactly what was happening, while still achieving the same result. The document never explicitly said I was being sold. That would have been illegal. Instead, it used professional language, sophisticated language, language that transformed something deeply disturbing into something that looked respectable. Yet beneath all the legal wording, one reality remained. Money was being exchanged, promises were being made, and I was at the center of it. I called Ryan immediately. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question we were both thinking. Who sent this? I don't know. His voice remained tense. No sender information. Could it be fake? I checked. A pause. The signatures are real. I closed my eyes. Real. The word hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I had still been hoping for an innocent explanation. Some misunderstanding. Some mistake. Some missing piece that would suddenly make everything logical. That hope was disappearing quickly. Then Ryan said something that made my heart race. There was another attachment. I froze. What? I almost missed it. My stomach dropped. What is it? Silence. Then his answer came. A photograph. I immediately opened the email again. Sure enough, another file appeared beneath the document. I clicked. The image loaded. For a moment, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. The photograph was old. Very old. At least 15 years old. The image quality wasn't great. Several adults stood together inside what looked like a hotel conference room. Business attire. Formal setting. Professional atmosphere. Then I noticed something. My mother. Standing near the center. Much younger. Smiling. Beside her stood Richard Walker. The two appeared comfortable together. Far too comfortable for people who supposedly met years later. Then I noticed a third person. A man I recognized immediately. My father. The sight made my heart stop. I zoomed in. My father wasn't smiling. Everyone else appeared relaxed. He didn't. In fact, he looked angry. His body language stood apart from everyone around him, as though he didn't want to be there, as though something was already wrong. The photograph revealed something we had never considered before. My father knew Walker. Not casually. Personally. Years before his death. Years before any of us realized. The realization changed everything. Because if my father knew Walker that well, then the conflict described in the letter wasn't random. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't suspicion. It was based on knowledge. Knowledge we still didn't possess. That night, Ryan and I spent hours discussing possibilities, theories, connections, questions. None of it brought us closer to certainty. But one thing became clear. We needed to stop looking at the present. The answers were hidden in the past. Specifically, the years before my father's death. The years before the payments became regular. The years before Walker became openly involved in our lives. The next morning, I made a decision. A decision I had avoided for days. I was going to confront my mother. Not with accusations, not yet, but with questions. Real questions. Questions she could no longer avoid. Questions that deserved answers. When I arrived home that evening, she was sitting in the kitchen, reading, completely unaware of what I knew. For a moment, I simply stood there watching her. The woman who raised me. The woman who taught me how to ride a bicycle. The woman who comforted me after nightmares. The woman who claimed she loved me. And the woman who had apparently been keeping life-changing secrets for more than a decade. I sat down across from her. She looked up, smiled. Then immediately noticed something in my expression. The smile disappeared. What is it? I took a slow breath. My heart pounded against my ribs. For years, I had trusted her completely. Now I wasn't even sure I knew who she was. Finally, I asked the question. When did you first meet Richard Walker? The color drained from her face instantly. Not slowly. Instantly. For a brief second, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. And in that moment, I knew something important. She wasn't afraid of the question. She was afraid of the answer. What happened next would become the most explosive conversation of my life. Because for the first time, my mother would stop denying the connection. And start revealing parts of the truth. Only parts. But enough to expose a secret that had remained buried for nearly 15 years. The moment I asked the question, the room changed. It is difficult to describe unless you've experienced it yourself. Sometimes a single sentence can divide your life into two parts. Everything before it, and everything after it. When did you first meet Richard Walker? My mother's face lost all color. Not gradually. Immediately. The reaction lasted less than a second. But it was enough. Enough to confirm that every suspicion, every document, every warning, and every strange memory pointed toward something real. She recovered quickly. Too quickly. Years later, I would realize that people who hide secrets for a long time become skilled at controlling their expressions. But nobody is perfect. And for one brief moment, I had seen genuine panic. What kind of question is that? She asked. Her voice sounded calm. Her eyes did not. I leaned forward. The kind that deserves an answer. She looked away. Toward the window. Toward the sink. Anywhere except me. Then she stood up. I don't have time for this. That response would have worked years earlier. When I was younger. When I trusted her. Not anymore. I stood too. Sit down. The words surprised both of us. I had never spoken to her that way before. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then something unexpected happened. She sat. Not because she wanted to. Because she knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. The silence stretched between us. Finally she spoke. I met him before your father died. The confession landed heavily. Not because it was shocking. I already suspected it. But hearing her admit it changed everything. How long before? She hesitated. Then answered. Several years. Several years. The words echoed through my mind. Several years. Not months. Not recently. Years. Every photograph. Every letter. Every suspicion. Confirmed. I swallowed hard. Why did you lie about it? Her shoulders dropped slightly. For the first time, she looked tired. Not angry. Not defensive. Tired. Because I knew what people would think. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the answer was unbelievable. What exactly are people supposed to think? She didn't answer. And that silence told me more than words ever could. I reached into my bag. Slowly. Carefully. Then I placed a copy of the scanned agreement on the table. The moment her eyes landed on the document, everything changed. She stopped breathing. At least it looked that way. Her hands froze. Her entire body became still. I had never seen fear like that before. Not from her. Not from anyone. Where did you get this? Her voice was barely audible. I ignored the question. What is it? Silence. What is it, Mom? She stared at the paper. Several long seconds passed. Then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. I hoped you'd never see this. The statement hung in the air. Heavy. Terrifying. Real. I felt anger rising inside me. Weeks of confusion. Weeks of lies. Weeks of discoveries. Everything was finally reaching a breaking point. Then explain it. She rubbed her forehead. The way someone does when they know there is no escape. No excuse. No easy way out. Then she said something I wasn't prepared to hear. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. The words confused me immediately. What wasn't? She looked directly at me. The agreement. I stared. She had just admitted it. Not indirectly. Not accidentally. Directly. The agreement was real. My pulse thundered in my ears. What agreement? For a moment, she said nothing. Then she finally began talking. And for the first time in my life, I started hearing pieces of the truth. Not all of it. Just enough. Years earlier, according to her, our family had been struggling financially. More than I ever realized. Medical bills. Debt. Business problems. Mortgage payments. Everything had been collapsing at once. Then Richard Walker appeared. Successful. Connected. Wealthy. At first, he offered business assistance. Then loans. Then opportunities. According to my mother, he seemed like a lifeline. Someone who could solve problems nobody else could solve. As she spoke, I noticed something. She wasn't describing a villain. She was describing a solution. A solution she trusted. A solution she eventually depended on. And that dependence changed everything. Your father hated it, she admitted. I immediately thought about the letter. The warnings. The arguments. The fear. He didn't trust Walker. She nodded. No. Why? Her eyes lowered. The hesitation lasted only a second. But it mattered. Because it revealed there was more. Much more. Finally she answered. Because Walker always wanted something in return. The room became silent again. There it was. The sentence we had been moving toward for weeks. Every favor came with a price. Every payment came with expectations. Every agreement came with conditions. The question was obvious. What did he want? My mother's eyes filled with tears. Real tears. For the first time during the entire conversation, the sight caught me off guard. Because despite everything, she suddenly looked less like a manipulator, and more like someone carrying a burden she could no longer hide. He said he wanted to help. Her voice cracked. That's what he always said. Help. The same word that appears in so many stories before everything goes wrong. Help. Support. Opportunity. Protection. Different words. Same result. I leaned closer. What did he actually want? She opened her mouth. Then stopped. As though saying the truth out loud would make it impossible to take back. The silence felt endless. Finally she whispered. You. I felt the world stop. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood. What? She closed her eyes. The tears finally fell. He wanted you. The room seemed to tilt. Every sound disappeared. Every thought vanished. Only those 3 words remained. He wanted you. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't process what I had just heard. Years of payments. Years of agreements. Years of involvement. Years of watching. And now the answer. Not influence. Not friendship. Not business. Me. The realization hit with terrifying force. Every memory suddenly looked different. Every photograph. Every visit. Every question he had asked about my future. Everything. And yet even then, I still didn't understand the most important part. Why? Why me? Why would a wealthy man spend years investing money into someone else's family? Why would he remain involved for so long? Why would he wait? My mother saw the question in my face immediately, and her expression changed. Because she knew what was coming next. She knew the next truth was worse than everything before it. Far worse. For years she had hidden it. For years she had avoided it. But now there was nowhere left to run. No lie left to tell. No secret left to hide. Because the answer to that question would reveal something neither Ryan nor I had ever considered. Something connected to my birth. Something connected to Richard Walker, and something connected to a secret that had existed long before I was old enough to remember. A secret capable of destroying everything I believed about my family. And once it was revealed, nothing would ever be the same again. After my mother said the words, "He wanted you," the room fell into a silence so heavy it felt physical. I didn't speak. She didn't speak. Even the sound of the house seemed to fade, like everything had been pushed far away from us. For the first time since this began, I realized something important. We had stopped talking about money, documents, and agreements. We were now talking about me. My existence. My future. My life. I swallowed hard. What do you mean he wanted me? My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded distant, strained. My mother closed her eyes again, as if trying to gather strength from somewhere deep inside herself. Then she finally spoke. It started before you were born. The sentence hit harder than anything I had heard so far. Before I was born. That meant everything I thought this story was about was wrong. I leaned forward slowly. Start from the beginning. She nodded faintly. And then, for the first time, she stopped hiding the timeline. She told me that when she was younger, life had already been difficult before my father ever became part of it. She described financial pressure, isolation, and a constant fear of not surviving month to month. When Richard Walker first entered their world, he didn't come with demands. He came with solutions. Money, assistance, stability. At first, he helped the family indirectly. Bills paid, opportunities offered, problems quietly solved without explanation. My mother paused here. I didn't understand it at first, she said. It felt like kindness. But kindness, she explained, slowly turned into something else. Walker became more involved. Not loudly, not aggressively, quietly, observing, asking questions, remembering details about the family that most people would never care about. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. He started asking about children. I froze. What children? She didn't answer immediately. That silence was enough. Then she continued. Your father thought it was strange. He confronted him. I remembered Ryan's letter at that moment. The warning. The conflict. My mother's voice dropped lower. Walker said he was interested in helping families long term, supporting future generations. He talked about legacy, stability, and investment in people instead of just businesses. The way she said it made it sound almost reasonable. Almost normal. But nothing about this was normal. I interrupted her. That still doesn't explain me. Her hands trembled slightly. I know. Another pause. Then she finally said it. One day, he made an offer. My stomach tightened. What offer? Her voice cracked. Financial security. For us. For years. I felt anger rise instantly. So you sold me? Her head snapped up. No. The answer came too fast. Too defensive. Too emotional. Then she corrected herself. I didn't think of it like that. That sentence was worse. Because it meant she had thought of it in another way. A way she could justify. A way she could live with. She continued speaking, slower now. Your father refused immediately. That part I believed. Without hesitation. He said Walker was crossing a line. My mother nodded. But the offers didn't stop. She explained that over time, the financial support increased. Not directly tied to me at first. Just general assistance. But always with an undertone. Always with quiet interest in my development, my schooling, my health, my future. Then came the moment everything shifted. When you were a child, she said softly, Walker made it clear he wanted involvement in your future decisions. My breathing slowed. In what way? She hesitated again. Then answered. He wanted influence over your education, your opportunities, your path. I shook my head. That's not normal. No, she admitted. It isn't. I stared at her. Then why didn't you stop it? That question broke her composure. For the first time, her voice rose slightly. Because your father made things worse. The sudden intensity shocked me. I stayed silent. She immediately lowered her voice again. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. But she had said it. And now I needed to understand it. What do you mean he made it worse? She took a shaky breath. He confronted Walker again. He threatened to expose everything. He told him to stay away from our family. I remembered Aunt Carol's words. The confrontation, twice. But my mother shook her head slightly. That confrontation changed everything. My stomach tightened. Why? Her eyes filled again. Because Walker stopped being patient. The room felt colder. What does that mean? She looked directly at me for the first time in what felt like hours. It means he stopped asking. My heart slowed. He started planning. Silence followed. Heavy silence. I felt something building inside me. Something I couldn't name. Something I didn't want to name. My mother continued, voice barely above a whisper. The agreement you saw wasn't the beginning. I froze. It was the continuation. My mind struggled to process it. There was something before it? She nodded. Yes, I whispered. What was it? She hesitated, then said the words that changed everything again. A private arrangement, tied to your birth. The air left my lungs. My birth? She closed her eyes. Yes. I felt my hands go cold. What does that mean? She didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was barely audible. It means Walker didn't become interested in you later. A pause. He was waiting before you were even born. The silence that followed felt endless. My mind raced. None of it made sense. How could someone wait for a child before they existed? What kind of agreement spans that far back? My mother continued, tears now fully visible. I thought I could control it. I thought it was just support. Just help. I thought I could manage it without letting it affect you. Her voice broke completely. But it was never just help. I stared at her, waiting, fearing what came next. Then she said it. The truth that had been buried under years of silence. Your birth wasn't just a family moment, a pause. It was part of the agreement. Everything inside me stopped. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone living a normal story anymore. I felt like someone who had been part of a plan from the very beginning. A plan I never agreed to. And one I still didn't fully understand. But the final piece was still missing. Because if my birth was part of an agreement, then the only question left was terrifyingly simple. What exactly was I meant to become? After my mother said, your birth was part of the agreement, I didn't speak for a long time. Not because I didn't have questions, but because I had too many. My mind couldn't settle on one thought long enough to form a sentence. Everything I believed about my life had shifted again. Birth, agreement, Walker, my father, my mother. Nothing stood in a straight line anymore. Everything was tangled together like a web I had been walking through my entire life without realizing it was there. Finally, I spoke. Tell me everything. My voice was low, controlled, but inside I felt like I was breaking apart. My mother shook her head slightly. I can't. That answer made something inside me snap. You can't? After everything I've seen? After everything I know now? She looked at me with tired eyes. It's not that simple. I laughed once, short, empty. Nothing about this has been simple. Silence followed. Then she stood up and walked toward the window, as if looking outside would help her find the right words. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Walker didn't just want influence. I waited. He wanted control over a specific outcome. My chest tightened. What outcome? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it felt like the final wall was falling. He believed your life would lead to something valuable. I frowned. What does that even mean? Her hands trembled slightly. I don't know everything he believed, but he spoke about you like a long-term investment. The word made my stomach turn. Investment. Not daughter. Not person. Investment. I stepped closer. So all of this, the money, the documents, the visits, it was all because of that? She nodded slowly. But it wasn't supposed to be this extreme. My voice sharpened. What was it supposed to be then? She hesitated, then finally said it. A monitored future. Guidance. Support. Structured involvement. I stared at her. That sounds like ownership with better words. She didn't deny it, and that silence said everything. I turned away for a moment, trying to steady myself. Then I asked the question I had avoided since part 1 of this nightmare. Did you ever love me, or was I always part of this? The room went completely still. My mother turned back slowly. Her face broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like something inside her had finally reached its limit. Don't ever say that, she whispered. Tears ran down her face. I loved you. The words felt real, and that made everything worse, because now I didn't know what was true anymore. Love and betrayal were standing too close together to separate. I took a deep breath. Then explain why you let it continue. She wiped her face. Because I thought I could protect you from the worst parts of it. I shook my head. You didn't protect me. A pause. You hid me. That sentence landed heavily. She didn't respond immediately. Then she spoke again. The worst part hasn't even happened yet. My entire body went cold. What do you mean? She looked at me, and for the first time her voice carried something different. Fear for me. Not fear of consequences. Fear of what was still coming. He's going to come for what he believes is already his. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Final. I stepped back slowly. No, I said quietly. That's not how people work. My mother shook her head. You're thinking like someone who doesn't know him. A long silence followed, then my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't want to answer, but something inside me told me I already knew who it was. I picked up. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a voice. Calm. Familiar. Older. Hello? My hand went cold instantly. Richard Walker. I didn't speak. He continued. It's time we spoke properly. My mother grabbed my arm immediately. No, she whispered. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Walker's voice stayed calm. You've learned enough to be confused now, but not enough to understand. I swallowed hard. What do you want? A short pause. Then the answer came. I want to finish what I started. My heart pounded. What does that mean? Another pause. Then the final line. It means I'm coming to see you. The call ended. My phone slipped slightly in my hand. My mother looked terrified. Not of him. Of what would happen next. Because now, there was no more hiding. No more documents. No more secrets. No more silence. Everything was about to come face to face. And whatever Walker had been planning since before I was born was finally reaching its conclusion. The story didn't end with answers. It ended with arrival. And for the first time in my life, I understood that some truths don't bring closure. They bring consequences.